everyone, I'm Sue from Sue Designs, where I bring you fast, fun, and adorable projects. In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to make the scarf mask. The scarf mask is super easy to put on. There's a little knot that you're going to create when you're finished making it in the back. Slip that over your head, flip your hair however you'd like, and put the little pieces of elastic around your ears. Let me show you how. All the tools and materials that you will need will be listed in the description below. The fabric I used is a really nice quilt quality cotton, and I did pre-wash it, dry it, and press it. You will need 2 pieces of elastic and 1 nose bridge. I used 6 inches of elastic, but you might want to adjust the length as needed. For the face mask itself, you will need 1 piece for the outside, 10 by 8 inches, and 1 piece for the lining, 10 by 8 inches as well. For the scarf, you're going to need a square that's 25 inches by 25 inches. What I did was measure one length, I snipped the fabric, and then I pulled it. When you do this, you're actually cutting the fabric exactly on the grain. It's a really great trick and tip so that you can get a perfect square. Now you rotate it, you measure the other side at 25 inches, snip it, and then rip the fabric. Disregard that extra material, and now you have a 25-inch square. Fold the square on the diagonal and align the raw edges. And then because you've ripped that fabric, there will be a few extra fibers. Just pull those strands and disregard them. Now what we're going to do is go to the ironing board and press our square on the diagonal. You're actually pressing it on the bias. So I want you to make sure the raw edges are aligned and press the entire angled piece. It's kind of like a big triangle. Now we're going to be cutting right on that folded pressed line. I found the best way to do this is to open it up, and there is your pressed crease that you created, and you're going to be cutting directly on top of that crease. Once you're finished cutting, you now have 2 triangular pieces. Go ahead and place them right sides together, fold them up, and put them aside for now. Now let's work on the face mask. Fold the outside in half widthwise so that it is 5 inches wide, and there is your fold. Get a marking pen and a measuring tape, and on the fold, you're going to measure in from the fold over a ½ inch. Place a mark. Now from the top raw edge, measure down 1 inch, and now connect the line so that you have a little half triangle. Place a pin through all layers and put this aside, because now we're going to do the same thing for our lining. Fold it in half, measure over a ½ inch, and measure down 1 inch. And connect the line. And put a pin through all layers. Now we're going to set our machine up for sewing with brand new needle and thread. You're going to sew directly through these marked lines on both the outside and the lining. Make sure you don't sew over your straight pin. Do a little reverse at the end, clip your threads, and repeat on the lining piece. Again, you're sewing directly over top of that line. Reverse, clip your threads, and now you have just created the little nose triangle pieces. When you're back at the cutting board, clip your threads, and now we're going to do some pressing. I do like to use the seam roll for this particular pressing because I can press flat and then use the end of the seam roll to open it up and press in one direction. Then flip it to the outside portion, the right side, facing out, and give it a good press. Repeat with the lining. Press it flat, open it up, and on the wrong side of the lining, this time you're going to press your seam allowance to the opposite direction. So whichever way you pressed the outside piece, press the lining in the opposite direction. Flip it to the right side of the lining and press it one more time. Now you're going to place some elastic. You're going to measure over about a ½ inch and place a piece of elastic on either edge, just like that. Now place your outside on top of your lining, right sides together, reattach the elastic through all layers, and really pay attention to which direction those seam allowances are going. For your little nose pleat, you're going to want the outside going facing toward the right, and the lining will be facing toward the left. This will just help when you're stitching it, sewing it flat, and pressing it. You're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance across that top edge. Backstitch at the beginning, and take your time when you go around that little triangled corner area that's for the nose. Rotate it and keep stitching a 1/4 inch all the way to the end. Make sure you catch the elastic at both edges. Clip your threads, and now let's go do some pressing. It's always a good idea to press every seam that you create flat. Sew it and press it. It helps release the fabric and the fibers and let them merge together. Now open up your seam, and the seam allowance will be facing the outside. And then place your wrong sides together and align that top seam. And kind of roll your material so that you don't see the lining poke through, and give it a good press. By pressing your seam allowance toward the outside material, it helps force that seam to lay nice and flat. See how it's laying really good? And you've even got your little nose pleat there popped up. Now it's time to add the nose bridge. In order to do this, center the nose bridge over that nose pleat in the center, and you're going to take a marking pen and mark about a 1/4 inch on the left and about a 1/4 inch past the right of the nose bridge. We're going to be creating a casing. And now we're going to be sewing a ½ inch casing for our nose bridge. You're going to start on the one edge of the mark, sewing from the top edge down a ½ inch. Sink your needle, rotate your fabric, and sew a ½ inch all the way to the other mark. When you get to the other mark, backstitch and clip your threads. Now you've just created a little casing that your nose bridge is going to just slip right into. Now slip your nose bridge up inside between the two layers and through that casing. And now you're going to sew straight along the other side of the casing, which will prevent the nose bridge from slipping out. Just do a little back stitch at the beginning and the end, clip your threads, and double check. Yep, it bends, perfect. Now it's time to erase those marks. For this particular marking pen, it has 3 different colors that are built right into it, and it has an eraser on the other side, and you'll see how easy it was to mark it and erase it. Looks good, and now what we're going to do is open our face mask, and we are going to attach the side piece of the elastic. Measure up 1 inch from the bottom edge. Take the elastic and go just below that straight pin. and secure the elastic to the outside piece with the pin, and repeat the same thing but on the other side. 1 inch up from the bottom, the elastic goes just below the pin, and now you're going to place right sides together and re-secure the pin through all layers on both sides. Now take that seam allowance from the top seam and face that seam allowance toward the lining. Just fold it down and then pop up the seam just as I've shown here. Put a pin through all the layers. Now when you go to sew this seam, it's going to give you a little resistance because of that elastic. Don't worry about it, just go ahead and place the pin on the side seam there. And when you get to your sewing machine, you'll just reposition your materials. We're going to sew both of those seams now. Make sure you sew that top folded seam allowance facing toward the lining side. And what's the trick about that is that when you turn that seam right side out, it will be a perfect corner. Just adjust the elastic on the inside because, like I said, it's going to give you a little resistance. So just kind of pull it, adjust until you finish the seam. And we are sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down the side. And sew all the way to the very bottom of that seam and turn it right side out real quick so that you can see how it looks. Excellent. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Start along the top, make sure that seam allowance is facing toward the lining. Sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down. Adjust the elastic inside as needed so that your seam lays nice and flat. And stitch all the way to the end, backstitch, clip your threads. And now it's time to turn your face mask right side out. Because we folded that top seam, it will make turning that seam really easy and it'll be a beautiful, perfect corner. Looks good, and now let's do some pressing. We really need to press those side seams. Again, you'll notice that I'm using the seam roll because it allows me to get around the curves and still press a nice crisp seam. Now it's time to mark our side pleats. First thing you'll do is mark a 1/2 inch mark at the bottom edge on either side. Take the top seam and align it with that 1/2 inch mark. Place a pin where you've just created the center on the fold, and that's going to be the center mark for our pleats. From that mark, you're going to measure up 2 inches, place a mark, and down from the pin 2 inches and place another mark. Repeat on the other side. From the center pin, measure up 2 inches, place a mark, measure down 2 inches and place a mark. Each of those marks will be aligned with that center pin to create the pleat. Reposition the pin to help secure that new found pleat. You'll notice I used 2 pins, and now we're going to do the same with the bottom. That mark will be pushed up to meet where the original center mark is, and a couple of pins to secure it in place. Now you have a total of 2 pleats. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. The bottom mark you'll see that was 2 inches below. We're going to align it with where the pin is, which is the center. Reposition and secure with pins, and the same with that top mark. Align it with where the center is to create your pleats, and now we're going to secure through the layers with pins. Now let's go to the sewing machine and top stitch along that side. Now I top stitched about a 1/4 inch. And you're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. And now your top stitching's finished, clip any threads you need to, and give your face mask a good press. The next thing you want to do is along that bottom edge, sew a 1/4 inch basting stitch. This will just hold your mask in place when we add it to the scarf, which is what we're going to do now. Make sure your big triangle scarf pieces are right sides together. Fold them in half along that top edge. That top edge is the one that you cut earlier, and place a pin exactly in the center. Find the center of your face mask and place a pin in it as well. Open up one piece of the scarf and place the scarf and the mask right sides together so that they are perfectly in the center, and pin them together along that top raw edge. Place the other piece of the scarf right sides together over top of the mask and secure with pins. Secure with pins all the way around all of the edges of the scarf. And if you notice on my scarf, I found there was a little bit of a distance issue. My lower piece was a little bit wider. So that's a real easy fix. You're just going to take your scissors and cut those long raw edges so that they are aligned. Alright, now let's go back to pinning. Make sure your layers are nice and smooth and continue to pin every 5 to 6 inches. Sewing this is going to be real easy. I started up at the top raw edge, down to the other side, and of course we are going to need to leave an opening, so I decided to do it on the left angled side. If you place pins going in the other direction, just like this, it will help keep you focused so that you don't sew over that area. So we're going to start sewing right there, all the way across the top, and you are going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance along all 3 edges. Again, remember to leave an opening. My opening was about 4 to 5 inches. Now it's a good idea to miter those corners to help when we're turning this right side out. So just cut it on a 45 and just kind of clean up the seam allowance inside that point. This bottom edge can just be cut on the 45. Now it's time to turn your scarf face mask right side out. Just go through that opening and continue to manipulate the material so that it pops out real nice. It's also a good idea to have a bamboo point turner. You can go into the corners with that turner and it just kind of makes your corners look nice and professional. So just take your time and do that on all 3 corners. And now it's time to do some good pressing. We're going to just roll those little seams so that they're nice and flat. Now that your pressing is all finished, if you wanted to go around the entire outside with a 1/4 inch top stitch, now would be the time to do that. However, I didn't want to add a top stitch to mine, but I do need to secure that opening. Now you could hand stitch or do what I did, which is to get a little bit of fusible backed tape, and you just put that paper backed fusible inside the seam and press it down. Once you've pressed it down, you actually remove the paper, and then it leaves the fusible web on the inside, and take your iron once again and give that a good press. This is a really good alternative if you're not really wanting to top stitch. It will last about 4 to 6 washings, so just keep an eye on it. Now tie a knot at the back where the 2 pointed edges meet, and it's time to put our scarf face mask on. All you do is slip it over your head, flip your hair however you'd like, put the elastic over your ears, the mask over your nose, and you are ready to go. Well, I really hope you enjoyed making this scarf mask, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments below. And if you did like this video, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. And of course, if you have not already, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Of course, join my weekly newsletter, follow me on Instagram, and best of all, you come have fun with us over at my Facebook fan club. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a creative day. Bye-bye! Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the bell button so that you get notifications every time a new video is uploaded. And here are a couple of videos you can watch next.